Business can be hard. With constant change and so many internal and external factors to consider, how can leaders unlock scale, build culture, community, and have the confidence to scale their impact? One often overlooked way is to build strategic cross-sector partnerships. Now, you could say my guest knows a bit about this topic from both the theoretical and the practical perspectives. He's a visionary leader with a PhD in leadership, specializing in cross-sector partnerships. He's a former management consultant, has won numerous national and local awards, including being on Avenue Magazine's prestigious Top 40 Under 40 list this year. He's a proud husband and the father of 2 kids, and he also happens to run a professional basketball team. Welcome to the Working Well podcast, the show that explores the rapidly changing landscape of work and well-being. Each episode, we dive into the hottest topics in leadership, employee well-being, and the future of work. I'm your host, Tim Boris. It's my pleasure to welcome Jason Ribeiro, the Vice Chairman and President of the Calgary Surge Professional Basketball Club. Jason, welcome to the Working Well podcast. So great to have you on the show, and looking forward to chatting a bit about basketball, business, life, and partnerships.
Well, no, thanks for having me on. I'm thrilled and eager to get into the conversation.
Excellent. So first thing I have to ask is, back in 2022, you're at UC finishing your PhD. What made you decide to start a professional basketball team in Calgary?
It's interesting, it's less about, I think, where I was at the time and more so about what had happened. I think the 7 years prior, and even dating back further to when I was a kid. Look, I had the great privilege of watching the birth of a professional basketball franchise, which was the Toronto Raptors, celebrating their 30th anniversary. I was that kid just outside of Toronto that all of a sudden saw at 6 or 7 years old the birth of a professional sports franchise, namely a basketball team, the first in Canada of that magnitude in a major city like that. And so, over the years, it was just an education watching that franchise grow, how it became more entrenched in the city, not just from the physical infrastructure of the then Air Canada Centre, but culturally. I remember all of a sudden like a switch flipped in Toronto, and what you mattered to the arena sort of mattered beyond a jersey. I remember my cousins, thinking about which club or bar they were going to get into afterwards for a chance at seeing Vince Carter or any of the other folks from the team. And so all of these things just get filed away. And even before I moved from Toronto to Calgary, it was really thinking about all the things that happened at Toronto at that time. You had the public square in front of the arena opened up to the public for the first time. You had pockets of culture like Caravana, which lived almost in the shadows, were almost a little bit of a hidden gem. All of a sudden, you saw them in every ad about Toronto, highlighting what was so diverse and unique about the city. You saw tech hit, and all these other things intersected. It seemed like the Toronto Raptors were involved to some degree, even music. The birth of Drake's career and The Weeknd and all these amazing artists that were coming out of Toronto. And then when I moved to Calgary in 2015, I took those lessons with me. So when, in 2022, I saw that press release saying that the Canadian Elite Basketball League was moving to Calgary and didn't have an ownership group attached to it, I thought all about those experiences as a kid and as a youth, living in the GTA and eventually living in downtown Toronto, and then thought about my previous 7 years in Calgary, thinking about what made our community special. Similar threads, different stories compared to Toronto and Calgary. They're very different cities, but really just how diverse our city is, this third most diverse city in the country. Thinking about our unique sport history and legacy with not only the 1988 Winter Olympics, but all the major teams that we host in this great market, and thinking about what Calgary needed differently. And so while it seemed like an unthinkable task, when you think about my previous kind of 7 or 8 years in Calgary, when you think about all those memories years ago, it seemed like a really logical next step to apply my talents, but certainly to build an amazing team around me that would be able to bring professional basketball in Calgary to fruition.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And I'm old enough that I totally remember the Raptors being launched, and it was transformative for Canada, never mind just Toronto. Yeah, it seeing that start to pick up in Calgary too is very exciting to see. I've been in Calgary 25 years now, and yeah, the city's changed dramatically since then, and it's good to see this new energy.
Yeah, and one of the data points that I even thought about was, the Raptors had come here some years ago and played an exhibition game, and they'd done it at the Saddle Dome, and it was a near sellout for an exhibition game. So if you had, and there were limited data points, believe me, but in going into this decision for my business partner and myself, but in terms of the ones that we did have around, people, organizing watch parties in Calgary during the 2019 championship run for the Raptors, that exhibition game, knowing that there'd at least been a history with things like the Calgary 88s and some of the other upstarts. It was really just, like the right group at the right time needed to grab the bull by the horns, so to speak, and really be bullish, not to, double down on my puns here, but to be bullish about and a bit aggressive about all the things that had changed in Calgary, but frankly, all of the things that were the same. It's still a great sports community. It's still amazingly connected from a youth sports environment. The demographics really map well from a newcomer perspective to countries that play basketball and the accessibility of the sport. So again, with what limited data we had, about what professional basketball would do, there was still this background or sense of comfort knowing that basketball was on the upswing, Calgary was on the upswing, and that if we could just channel that or harness that, we'd be able to bring this to the community in a way that would make them proud.
That's amazing. Yeah, and previous time we chatted, and what I've seen for articles and your background, your background's in leadership from the educational side, and you're really leading this team in a different way. Tell me, you talked about partnership mentality. How does that come in?
Yeah, I think for me and the diverse hats that I've worn in my career, I've always, found such reverence, not necessarily, what I'm doing or the achievements or the success, but really about like who's standing beside you. I think your affiliations really, really matter, and should be treated with such care and reverence. I remember, I think like the first committee I joined, and again, I'm a volunteer, and everyone's looking for volunteers to do free work. But I remember being like, well, why is this committee for this organization that's doing fund development or grants? Why are they comfortable with this, kid who just kind of moved here, like I did in 2015 to do my PhD work at the University of Calgary? Why are they even, taking my call? Why are they even responding? So there's a bit of that imposter syndrome. But once you get past that, it's really like, no, I have a reverence for that relationship and that institution. And then, as your career grows, you get more and more of these affiliations. And whether it for me was, Global News or CBC or the University of Calgary or any of the brands that I've worked with globally from a consulting practice, it was just one after the other. I just couldn't believe that they would take a chance on me and that we would be aligned. And so when we acquired the team and launched it, I knew it wasn't just going to be, and maybe this was a purposeful choice. I knew it couldn't just be about us, my business partner and myself. And the reason why was because think about sports ownership nowadays. It's become this kind of plaything for folks who, either have vanity interests or legacy interests. You can look at really positive or negative motivations for acquiring some of these properties. But for us, we thought about, well, that's not really us. What is the opposite of that? And the opposite was who's going to stand beside us? And frankly, not even shoulder to shoulder, who can we amplify and create a stage for? And how much more stronger would we be as an entity if it wasn't so, required that someone be constantly driving or holding the message. And so when it became really practical about the things that we needed to do, obviously as operators, we're very involved and very engaged, but we knew we couldn't do it alone. And so our ethos from the very beginning was to assemble the group of partners that would allow us to achieve scale really quickly, allow the product that would end up taking the court in just a few months after we had launched the team to be professional, to be reflective of Calgary. And then what evolved was really this kind of mantra or analogy of, if we're successful, it won't be because we're super savvy or because we have, years of experience in professional sports. We don't. If we're successful, it will be because we held up a mirror to Calgary. And really we reflected back Calgary's hopes, Calgary's aspirations, Calgary's yearning for something different in the sports and entertainment landscape. And if Calgarians or the customers start to see themselves in that, we'll know we'll have done our job. And so by partnering with Strange Bedfellows and all of these different kinds of institutions that you don't naturally think of sometimes when you think about professional sports, post-secondary institutions, charitable organizations, for us to have done that work and knowing the social capital that they hold, I think is a really, really large part of our success in the first 2 years has been because of that partnership mentality of holding up the mirror, thinking about the trusted relationships that Calgarians have in their daily lives, thinking about the reverence and care in which we need to treat those relationships as partners, and then create more and more stages and more eyeballs and more magnifying glasses that allow more people to see what's unique about the ecosystem that we've created with the Calgary Surge.
I love it. And there's so many leadership lessons in your approach that lots of corporations and executive teams can come away with. That's that humility of like, hey, we're new here and we don't pretend we know everything, and we're going to reach out to other people and let's co-create something amazing together. It's a fabulously powerful approach. Not a lot of people use it. You mentioned the newcomer mentality of just being like, hey, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm coming in and just trying to figure this out. That humble approach. How do you think? I've got a few other questions, but how do you think other leaders in established industries or people that are in a role for a long time can take some of that mindset and apply it in their position?
Look, I think there's always got to be a tension, right? Like great things come out of tension. It can't be static or rinse and repeat. So while we were, I think, incredibly humble and reverent about what we didn't know, there were some very, very direct and aggressive calls by being operators at the core of who we are, that we just made out of instinct. And I think it's the push and pull between both. And so I think while it sounds good to be this kind of humble servant and let everyone sort of come in and we'll decide by committee and co-create, maybe that can be the positioning. And I agree that openness will allow you to see things that others don't. And as leaders, I think that's really important if you're trying to add new value, particularly in a space that may require disruption. But I think for folks that are in established positions, they also need to know what they do know. And if you're really, I think if you're really sharp and astute in how you go about leading, you'll always be listening anyways. Whatever you've decided very concretely, sometimes even by fiat, will still be grounded in this openness and this humility. I'll give you an example. I remember one day I walked into our office and I told the staff that, before our first game, I want to think about something different in relation to the game experience. I'm a big music guy, so I not only the enjoyment of listening to good music, but the music business. I'm just constantly fascinated, and I've always been looking at the charts and those kinds of things since I was a kid. I really thought about, hey, I don't think I've ever been to a sporting event or any event, so to speak, where I actually hear the most popular music reflected. And the popular music isn't just what's on the Billboard Hot 100. Now with streaming and the diversity of people who have access to streaming services, you're seeing this openness to, what used to be very dominated by music labels. They'll work this song or this artist. Now you're seeing just TikTok making a song viral, or you're seeing some kid in a basement somewhere in a different country creating a particular sound, and all of a sudden it takes over the world and climbs up the charts. The odds are you're going to, when you go to an event, you don't, or particularly an established event, you don't hear that song. Think about it in a sports environment as well. It's typically, Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, Pantera, and you can insert name here.
We all love Thunderstruck, but
exactly
so many times.
And I love Thunderstruck too, but it's what can we do differently, and what can we do that's more reflective? And so I just remember by sort of fiat, I said, when the season starts at our games, 30% of the music that we play will not be in English. and it'll be a kind of rule. Like it'll be this principle that we apply, and I'll get the DJ on board. We'll hold the line on it. And I remember everyone didn't understand kind of why, because it never had been phrased in that way. And I probably could have even phrased it, a little bit more explain it in explanation and explain the rationale, like maybe I'm going into now. But we didn't have a lot of time, and I just said, this is what we're going to do. But what underpinned that was not Jason wants this. What underpinned it was an understanding of, like, if we pull up the charts right now, top 10 on Spotify or on Billboard, there'll probably be two Bad Bunny songs in Spanish. There'll probably be, Rose and Bruno Mars, APT, which, has an Asian influence to it as well in terms of the language. Like 3 of those 10 songs, if not more, will not be in English. And so when you think about Calgary as the 3rd most diverse city in the country, when you think about all the languages that are spoken frequently in Calgary, when you think about International Avenue, when you think about the northeast of Calgary, kind of seems appropriate. And it kind of seems like, even though that's a radical idea, it's probably not, because that's clearly what people are listening to in their cars, clearly what they're listening to with their loved ones, with their family, in their headphones at the gym. Why don't we go out to an event where that's actually reflected? So I think it's that creative tension between both of those positions. It's that humbleness, humility, openness to being open to the world, to even know that fact of like what the charts were and how many were not in English or in English, knowing your audience and your market of, a very diverse community in Calgary, but then being very direct and bullish enough to say, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to be confident, and we're going to, if there are responses or feedback or reactions, we'll take those, but we're going to make a choice. So I think for established leaders, it's you're in those positions because you're you. So you don't want to downplay what makes you unique in your lived experience and your discernment when making great decisions that have led you, not led you astray, at least until this point. But that openness and that humility and the tension between those two, I think ultimately allows for better decisions more reflective of stakeholders, shareholders, and customers, and ones that can be augmented fairly easily as experiments that you can run in day-to-day practice.
Yeah, I love that. And it's being clear on exactly what you believe in, your values, your goals, but being open to how it's interpreted and experimenting with that.
Yeah, awesome. and we didn't, and I don't think you need to sort of announce that, hey, by the way, everyone, we're gonna start playing. Not like we just did it. Like it just happens, and I think the more these things kind of get diagnosed in your head, the more you'll sort of deviate from it, versus taking that leap and taking that risk and being open to the feedback and assessment of what that looks like. If I did get feedback that was en masse, like maybe we've overshot what we thought the market required or desired, you can always adjust. But the real shame would be to not try or to not take that leap. So 100% agree.
Yeah, experimenting to disrupt the status quo, and just because something's been done for a long time the same way doesn't mean, in fact, it's probably a sign that it should improve at some point. 30, 40 years from now, we don't want to be listening to Thunderstruck still,
or at least as a throwback. Like I'll give you the other opposite example where we, I remember at our home opener last year at the Saddle Dome, we did this cute little thing where the players went away. It was the season opener. We had 12,000 people in the arena, and I'd never seen this done before. But we actually got the IP rights and trademark to the Calgary 88s, which was a team 30 years ago that played in Calgary at a very short 4-year run. But we were able to get the trademark and the IP rights. And I had the players change their outfits or their jersey kits in the locker room at halftime. And I said, despite this, 30% rule and we're doing things differently, I said, you better believe they're coming out to Guns N' Roses or Thunderstruck if they're coming out in the 88's uniform. So we did actually, I think it was Sweet Child of Mine, like the guitar riff opens up and the guys came out. So I think there's space for everything to exist, but the intention of where these things get placed versus just we have this safety net of what's been done before, I think is really that sweet spot of making sure that you're not attacking one thing over the other, but you're saying everything has a place and a context and a time. And in that game, it made sense to go with Guns N' Roses.
Awesome. Well, yeah, knowing your audience as well, and almost the analogy of the perfect wedding DJ. You have to
Nice.
be you have to be able to mix it in enough that the grandparents are happy and the young kids are happy and the bride and groom are happy too. So
Right.
awesome. Well, and previously you mentioned some diverse partnerships across the community that might not have been, I guess, a natural thought that, charitable organizations are one, but talk about some of the unique, I guess, more unique community partnerships that you've fostered.
Yeah, I think when I think about one of the more unique partnerships that we have, it's with a charitable agency called Kids Up Front. The backstory for both my business partner and I is we've been individual donors to Kids Up Front for a number of years, and to level set, they're an organization that works with social agencies, across the various regions. There's chapters across the country, and what they do is they work with sports organizations, live theater organizations, any live event that's occurring, and encourages either the owner operators of that event or donors to donate tickets, providing those experiences downstream to any of the beneficiaries of these social agencies. So you can imagine, organizations that work with domestic violence survivors, or folks that work with newcomer associations or youth mental health groups, the ability to provide deserving kids and families a free night out is hugely impactful. And one of the things that is unique about their model is they have really aggressive cutoffs, meaning that, or aggressive depending on how you look at it, it could be the day of an event, like the Flames could be playing tonight. You have a ticket to the game and, your son is sick. And it doesn't seem appropriate to go anymore. You could either waste the ticket, or you could contact Kids Up Front, donate the ticket. They'll try and move heaven and earth to find a family through those social agencies that can go and attend that game. And then you, as the donor for the value of that ticket, get a tax receipt. And so they've operated for years with this pretty unique model. And I remember we had them to the launch of our team in October 2022. And one of the things both Usman and I said was, we want this team to be for the underdogs. We want this team to be for the forgotten. And we want to find a way to create that pathway for some of the most vulnerable kids and families in our communities to come to our games. And so over the months, I was just, racking my brain about, well, what does that actually sort of look like? I can block grant for free a number of these tickets, and just assign them to these kids, but certainly in the long run, that neutralizes revenue for me, and certainly we play in an arena that's has a particular capacity, and so if I'm not really leveraging all the seats there, it really is just lost and neutralized revenue. There's got to be a better way. And so I was thinking about that model of you being able to tonight donate your ticket right now, and them scrambling to find a family. And I sort of asked them, I'm like, how many times are you able to find a family? I'm like, sometimes it's too late, right? We want to keep that cutoff there, because sometimes social agencies and their staff use those tickets to reward them for doing all this amazing work. But sometimes we just can't find the family, and it doesn't really go to where it's desired. And I thought about their name, Kids Up Front. And in that example of you not going to the Flames game tonight, is that really putting the kids up front? No, that's an afterthought, really. It's really like, let me dump this ticket on a social agency that'll work with another social agency to get a kid this ticket. So I said, what if kids were actually up front? And what if we created a program that encouraged corporates and philanthropic organizations to donate blocks of these tickets to be able to send these kids to these games for free? And as a way of recognizing those donors, Kids Up Front will work with us on potentially some sponsorship assets or some hospitality options that we can then honor the donor who's participating in this program. And I asked them, has that ever been done before? Like kids actually being put up front? And there's like, to our knowledge, there's no history of a program being created that has that best practice. And so I said, let's do this. And this was the management consultant and me trying to figure out what is the best process for this. And, we really just created what was called the Surge Assist program. And the double entendre is really, it's about passing that ball and helping that social agency or helping that donor connect and have a really clear way to create impact. And so what resulted is this program that has now existed for the last, 2 years. We've been able to send over 4,250 kids to our games for free due to the generous support of donors who have helped us fundraise over $300,000. But that's not the best part. The best part of this is not only the win-win that happens with the corporates and the philanthropic organizations. The best part of this is now this is a program that's open sourced. And with Kids Upfront chapters all across the country, we've open sourced the best practices that we've learned. And even teams in our league are now launching programs that are similar to the Surge Assist program. And so when you think about it, as someone who's trying to create impact, whether our name is associated with or not, it's really a humbling experience to create these kinds of partnerships that at the end of the day create impact far beyond what the Calgary Surge is able to do in the local community.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And I like the idea of, seeing, okay, hey, this is working, but how do we make it better? And it's that iteration, and perfect to play off the name of Kids Upfront, because yeah, you're right. Like if they're sitting in the, 300 level of the Saddle Dome with their head hitting the ceiling, they're not upfront. And yeah, when you were saying that, I had a vision of kid in Madison Square Garden right on the hardwood.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like for us, it's like I still to this day I don't exaggerate this. There's 2.5 years of this business. There's been attendance records and a lot of amazing highs of going to championship weekend 2 years in a row in our first 2 years and game winners. But the best moment of this entrepreneurial journey by far has been one that kind of took me aback, and you can see the through line of how you create a culture of getting people to buy into something that, again, is like really technical about a charitable organization working with a corporation that's working with another corporate and transferring tickets and donations. I remember one day it was towards the end of our first season, and one of our assistant coaches is actually the executive director of a youth serving organization that specifically focuses on Eritrean youth. And he came up to me, before the game. I was just walking around the court, and he checked in with me, and he rarely, bugs me, because I'm pretty intense before the game. But he said, "Hey, I just want to let you know, I've done something." I said, "What do you mean you've done something?" He's like, "The coach signed off on it." And I said, "Just tell me what's going on." He's like, "Just so you know, my youth group, my young Eritreans group, is the beneficiary of Surge Assists today. So they're going to be coming, and I could see all the shirts laid out for them, and that had the donor's name on it." And I said, "Oh, it's amazing. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing them here." And he's like, "Coach has actually said to me that, like, kind of after the game, if we win, I can actually bring all these 130 kids down to the locker room and just have them line up in the tunnel and have the players engage with them." And we'd never done it because it's not a huge tunnel, 130 kids screaming. It'll be a bit intense. It's where we do press conference interviews and everything like that. And this is the first I was hearing of it. I said, yeah, it's no problem. And as I was saying it, I just saw these bunch of these kids starting to run on the concourse to the shirts, because I guess they'd organized a bus. And I just saw them all descend, and I said, "Oh, this is a really beautiful moment." I remember we ended up winning the game, and I usually am one of the first guys off the floor to dap up the guys as they're coming through the tunnel. And so I was hanging out in the back, talking to the coaches, and all of a sudden I saw these kids pouring into the tunnel, and the players were doing their post-game meeting. And as they walked out, I just saw them all screaming. And again, this was the first year of the team, and they were screaming like they just saw the Raptors or the Lakers, or like we just won a championship. And you realized what this meant for these kids. And I'm looking around, and all of us are like tearing up. Like the press is kind of tearing up. The players are like taken aback because they're just running through after a big win and dapping up all these kids. And it was such a transformative moment to say, yes, the great business innovations can be the great business innovations, and maybe they'll go in some white paper someday. But at the end of the day, if the motivation is right, it'll be these moments that stick to your ribs and continue to push you to innovate in that creative tension between doing something disruptive and getting something established and something that has scale over periods of time. But it was certainly something that reminded us of just how impactful some of these little tweaks and intentions can be for the community impact that you're trying to generate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just go back to like the Gallup Q12 is like, do you find meaning from your work? And when you can create that, in as part of the culture where, yeah, we're making a real difference here. And I see that missing from so much of the corporate world these days. And it's not complicated to do. It's about, do you put the effort into it? Have you baked it into your DNA as part of the values of the company that this is what we do? Yes,
Right.
we produce profits and we have to, make the financials work, but that's table stakes. How are we elevating the experience for not just our customers, but for our team, for everyone involved, the community? Yeah, I love it.
100%.
And I live just up the hill from Winsport, so my kids are at Winsport all the time, and they go to the sports school there, and so it's every time there's a Surge game on, it's chaos in that area. There's so many people, and it's been amazing to see that response. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it continues to grow.
Awesome.
So when we look at and one couple of things first, you had mentioned the last time we chatted about the challenges of a seasonal business. So how are you, after multiple years, how are you managing that in season, off season flow?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think, from a seasonal perspective, welcome to sports, right? There's going to be a season and an off season. So I think, knowing that up front helps organize at least a mental model of how you need to think about these things. But again, it's that tension between, okay, we know when the season is. How do we blur the lines and how do we extend what the season is in our minds? And then how do we then build some of the experiments that actually, I think, resonate and create that 365 that you really want to see for any business, even if there are peaks and valleys from the last game we play being in, a sellout all the way through, the holidays and gearing up for the next season. So I think for us, it's been, I think, really instructive on building out the model internally of, okay, if we know things are going to be really intense during the season, how do we build in capacity and internal development in the off season so that we know we're not just relying on, May to come and we're going to just all of a sudden execute better. No, we're going to prep between that September to April time period to make sure that we're ready so that everything is kind of tickers to tape. And I think that's akin to any sort of business that has a high and low season. Like I'm on a board for the Alberta Motor Association, for example. You don't think of that as a seasonal business because, there's banking, there's insurance, there's travel, there's all these things going on. But at the end of the day, they still have to, from a roadside perspective of that business, plan for the period we're in now, which is there's snow on the ground, there's storms, it's cold, there's going to be battery failures. And how do you build the internal capacity to monitor and manage that higher demand? And so whether that's building cross-functional teams, whether it's pulling staff from different places, whether it's creating more capacity within even one individual's role, I think there's just a part of that exists in every business. So I think part of that is really, really typical. The second part, though, I think is, again, blurring the lines. So I think as a league and as part of the Canadian Elite Basketball League, we've started to run experiments that allow us to push beyond the scope of what was a 10-game season and now extend that even further. So, we've gone from 20 games last 2 years of 10 home games, 10 away games. This will be the first season where we experiment with 24, 12, and 12. And so you're starting to see the season creep up earlier into May, go later into August. And so I think those innovations, being in the live events business, I think it's not a far stretch to say that in the next 3 to 5 years, you're probably going to see us do more live events off season. And whether those are with our Surge hat on or whether those are in a different context, be it music or arts and culture or basketball, just in a different context other than the pro sports realm of the Surge. We now have the formula that will allow us to do that. So I think you constantly have to be running those experiments within the current context you have and outside of the current context you have. And I think that's been, really instructive for our staff to know there are no rules. So best idea wins. And if we can open ourselves up to the possibility versus resigning ourselves that there's no possibility beyond being our season starts here and it ends here, I think you're going to start to see those ideas bubble up to the forefront. And for us, it's been, I think, really, really interesting to manage not only when we're on and when we're dark, when we're building internal capacity, when we're executing, and then also when we're running those experiments to build out a seasonal business into a year-round business.
Yeah, I love that. It's you brought up so many things that resonate with me in terms of how just in business in general works, and how leaders can leverage so many aspects of their current resources to improve it. One of the things that popped out was you'd mentioned like the cross-sector partnerships before, but turning that internally, and so many companies are so siloed. And I like how you said the best idea wins. Is like, how do we leverage the knowledge and skills and ideas from all these other areas of the business, and pull it into help us be creative and create new solutions that we haven't even thought of yet.
100%. And I think there's a pacing to that as well, right? I think you want to establish, and certainly for us, I think it's really establishing not a formula, but principles that underpin the core product. Because I think the core product is still evolving, whether it's experiments like, one-off games in an NHL arena, whether it's, creating bespoke events with a particular university that, we've launched for the first time last year, which is going to continue on into this year. It's the pacing of, I use this analogy, when you're on the entrepreneurial path, I liken it to a plane taking off. There's always going to be more opportunities to add runway, right? Hey, if we had 6 more months, we'd be able to do this. Or if we, really just, if this partnership comes in and lands, we'll have the ability to go do this. And those are all runway considerations, right? What you really need to be focused on, and Keith Rabois says this really well, is you need to be focusing on lift. Year over year, are we experiencing lift? Is actually the core of the business getting that lift? And in our businesses, are we creating more live events that generate more revenue? Are we expanding our relationships purposefully? So we're opening ourselves up to new audiences or new markets or new revenue generating opportunities or new social impact opportunities. Lift is what matters. The runway stuff is always going to be there. Those constraints are always going to be there. But year over year, if you're getting lift, there's nothing that you can't do. If you're in a particular field and you're a startup and you're looking to raise capital, believe me, the investor and the VCs are the only thing they're going to look at is lift. They're not going to be worried about, what Series A, Series B, Series C, what if you need 6 months out of this or whatever. Are you getting lift? Is the product getting traction? And so for us, I think it's really important to really just have that assessment of going back and saying, yeah, we were the first team to do X, Y, and Z. And all of these new experiments are either getting abandoned or they're getting institutionalized. And if we can look at ourselves every year and we're getting that lift, that's what will matter. And that's what will not just matter to us internally from a business perspective. That's what will matter and serve the mutual goals that we have with stakeholders, with our league, with our partners, and with the community.
And from the crowds that I saw last season, there's lots of lift. You're doing great.
Appreciate
and
it.
The fans are super engaged. So it's great to see. What before we wrap up, what is if you had to summarize your leadership philosophy, what would it be? I've had so many great ideas from you so far, but wrap it up in a nice bow for us.
There's only two. I guess, there's only two real sort of quotes or mental models or philosophies that I draw upon. The first is the easiest to understand. It's the old, African proverb around, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think you can see how that underpins that perspective on sort of servant leadership, on humility, on doing things with partners, on creating stages for others to thrive. And if you're doing that, you'll enable capacity for yourself as well. Like I really think it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. I've certainly with my doctoral work and my sort of long career in management consulting, I know all the names and schemes of this principle and this philosophy, et cetera. But what's often missed is that core piece of, you want to achieve anything great. You want to achieve anything that has impact or scale. You're going to have to build a great team around you, and you're going to have to be able to do it with partners, because you'll only get so far if you're trying to do everything yourself, or you haven't created the culture or the dynamics in which others can feed in and add to and supplement what you're trying to build. So I think that's the first. The second one is even more simple. It's underpinned in good science, but I think it's even simpler, which is adapt or die, pure and simple. And I know you've got a baseball background, and so even I think in the dedication in my doctoral dissertation, that was the quote that I used, was adapt or die, and it was particularly from that scene in Moneyball where Billy Beane, and played by Brad Pitt, is talking to a scout, and he's telling him the new way that the Oakland A's are going to run, and they're going to use data science, and they're going to use predictability, and Bill James's sort of Moneyball technique around predicting runs and wins. And that's what the new version of the Oakland A's is going to be, trying to compete in what at the time was, in his perception, an unfair game. And he just looks at this kind of scout that's set in his ways, and he just said, adapt or die. And while it's such a simple idea, for me as a researcher, it's really got great foundations in complexity science and biology. Like it really, there's another principle that underpins complexity thinking, which is no man steps into the same river twice, because he's not the same man and the river's not the same. And if you think about that, the water is just constantly moving, and as the seconds and minutes tick off, the man himself is different, taking in all of these different experiences. Yeah, we're in constant motion. We're in constant flux environments. And so from a startup perspective, I think what's allowed us to keep all of our hair, knock on wood, today, I've got a few more grays than I used to, but it's been that adapt or die perspective, that no 2 days are going to be the same, that especially in such an ops intensive business of converting a hockey rink into a basketball court and learning how to do ticketing and players and contracts and all of this kind of stuff that goes into what we've done over the past 2.5 years, has been like, we are not going to get married to one way of doing things, where things are going to get messed up. Things are going to shift. Things are going to change. And I'm going to say one thing in the morning, and I'm going to counteract it later in the afternoon, because new information came across my desk, or a change in perception, or the man is not the same who was in that river an hour ago to now. And if everyone has that mentality, it won't feel as though they're in quicksand and things are constantly changing. It will be that survival mode that kicks in, of constantly wanting to adapt and nothing staying the same. So it attracts a certain kind of team member. It attracts a certain kind of partner that, some are a little bit overwhelmed when I call them and I say, hey, we're doing this thing where we're, playing at the Saddle Dome this time around, and a sponsor say, well, what do we need to do for that, et cetera. But there's other ones who are just like unbelievable. Like, I would never have thought, in your second year, you'd be opening up at an NHL arena. But the philosophy internally is we do feel like it is adapt or die, and the potentials that come from that and the clarity that comes from that, I think is incredibly powerful and has been valuable, at least for our business and for our team.
I would agree. Yeah, it's working well, and playing that forward, you've made some great accomplishments over the past few years. What does the future look like over the next few?
I think it's really, and we really haven't talked about this publicly, but I really consider the last 2 years a pilot. I really think it's been, this tension for us has been, did we acquire a franchise or did we found a startup? And I think after 2 years, we have our answer, which is, I think we founded a startup. There's been a lot of good principles and amazing principles that, we've adopted from the Canadian Elite Basketball League, which, we're obviously a proud partner of. But I think what we're doing is trying to run our own race and to exist where, yes, there are rules in basketball, but at least from an organizational perspective, there are no rules. And so in terms of the future, I think just the last 2 years have emboldened us to continue to think differently and to continue to be disruptive and to be confident in that positioning in the market. And one of the greatest examples of that is, we don't just consider ourselves a sport organization. We also consider ourselves an arts and culture organization. And while that sounds like a good line to talk about to differentiate yourself, when we think about it in practice, we employ and support tons of artists. Every anthem that gets sung at our games is by a different local artist. The performers that we've had at halftime, the stories that we've been able to tell on our digital channels of artists. And even now in the outdoor plaza, we've got different DJs and creatives that are working, fine arts, painters, illustrators that have helped us grow this business and this brand. What you're going to see from us for years forward is a doubling down on that. At that Saddledome game, we had a 40-piece orchestra open up the entire event playing Jay-Z, which is as complicated as it sounds. But it was important for us to do that and say, are people going to get weirded out by this? Are people going to just say, hey, just start the game? And they weren't. They were fully bought in to say, whoa, that's how you do a signature event. That's how you kick off an entire CBL season. That's how you show up properly to an NHL arena. So I expect for us to continue to double down on that philosophy of being in that space between professional sports and arts and culture. And I suspect that fans are going to be pleasantly surprised, not just at the core product that we offer at WinSport, but in the weeks ahead, announcements about some really special signature events that I think reflect that doubling down on who we are, being disruptive and owning the unique space that we occupy and hope to occupy more of in the Calgary market and the surrounding region.
Fantastic. Well, I know for one, I'm looking forward to getting out to some games once the season starts. And yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. I will make sure I post all the links in the show notes so people know where to go and where to buy tickets. And thank you so much for sharing the leadership insights and your bit of behind the scenes about the team and the franchise.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for creating this space for leaders to be able to talk and share their best practices and their learnings and their experiments. I'll close by saying, I don't think we've got everything figured out, but I think that as part of telling the story of what we do think is useful or helpful, our goal is to, again, just open source and make sure that we're supporting others and reflecting on some of the choices that we've made for better or worse, and just open sourcing some of those learnings so that at the end of the day, the community gets a better product, better experience, more diverse experiences as we continue to support and grow a great Calgary life for many people. So thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, I would be concerned if you said you had everything figured out and knew you knew everything. So yeah, learning, growth, that's what it's all about. Thank you so much. Look forward to connecting again soon.
Thank you so much.
That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timboris.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Boris with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.